Now, in the year that America elected its first black president, we look back at the career of a singer who spent his life facing prejudice against his skin colour, but still managing to thrill audiences more than any other performer. Right from the very beginning of rock and roll, one man has stood out as the most flamboyant and the most controversial of all, as Sarfraz Manzoor finds out in 50 Years of Little Richard.
Whether you're teenage or I'm teenage, this sort of music can certainly get in your blood. You can rock and roll again, this time with Little Richard.
The original impact of Little Richard just cannot be understated. There was nothing more exciting than Little Richard. I mean, he was the greatest.
Imagine a world without Elvis Presley, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Imagine the story of popular music that's missing Bob Dylan, Ray Charles, Jimi Hendrix, Michael Jackson, Prince and James Brown. Those are just some of the artists and bands who have publicly admitted their debt to Little Richard. If Elvis was the king, then Little Richard was and is the innovator, creator and architect of rock and roll. A man who, in pre-civil rights deep South America, was both black and sexually ambiguous, who later managed to combine being a hell-raising rock and roll singer with being a devout Christian. I'm Sarfraz Manzoor, and I had the privilege of speaking to Little Richard about his extraordinary life. It's a story that begins in Macon, Georgia on December the 5th, 1932.
My mama had 12 children, and I was a little big-head boy. I had the biggest head of all my sisters and brothers, and still have the biggest head. Didn't catch it, but I always wanted to be a singer. You know, you want attention. You know how it is. That's when you do what you do. You like attention.
Especially if you've got 11 brothers and sisters.
And when you ain't got none, you look for some. So you want some attention. I wanted attention. So when I started banging on the piano and started screaming and singing, you know, I got attention.
Good golly, Miss Molly, sure like the ball. Good golly, Miss Molly, sure like the ball. When you're rocking and a rolling, can't hear your mama call.
I read somewhere that you preferred or you were inspired by female singers more than male singers. Is that true?
Well, you know, all the male singers had sound like someone stuck in their throat. You know, like Brooke Benton. I love Big Ben. You know, heaven placing. I don't know why. I don't know why. I have to cry. You know, the way that he go down. But I liked that high voice, that high pitch. So I would imitate. Before Aretha came along, I used to imitate the same lady. Her name is Clara Ward Singers. She had a gospel group out of Philadelphia, and the Davis Sisters, and Brother Joe May, and Winona Carr, and Sister Rosetta Tharpe. All those people back in that time. I liked that. I had that real high voice, and they would do that, woo, woo, that high holler, and so I would imitate that holler. That's a 76-year-old holler now, you know, so the holler ain't as strong as it used to be, but it's still a holler. Yeah.
His voice is the most incredible thing about him, and the most important instrument a human being has, a musical instrument, is the human voice.
Charles White, Little Richard's biographer.
As a child, he used to go to the local church, and the Penniman family themselves formed a group called the Tiny Tots Quartet. It was here that he learnt the gospel. But what really brought him forward was later on, after he listened to Sister Rosetta Tharpe and Marion Williams, he toured with circuses and carnivals, but most of all medicine shows. Now, medicine shows preyed on people's, it's like health foods, dare I say, where, you know, if you believe this is going to cure you, and the snake oil include your rheumatism, if your eyesight is getting bad, rub it on your eyes, and he learnt the art of communicating.
Little Richard was born in the heart of the Bible Belt in Georgia, and his life was enriched by the gospel music that inspired and sustained the black community during those difficult years in the 50s. Growing up black in the South was to run up against racism that is hard for us now to comprehend. Charles White again.
It was horrific. I mean, we can't imagine what it's like to be black in the South. They couldn't use hotels or restaurants, or they couldn't drink in white quarters, travel on certain buses and trains. It was diabolical. It was horrible. And there was a deliberate culture of hatred between the whites and the blacks.
Was it tough being black at that time?
Oh, it's tough being black now. What you talking about? It was just tough being black any time. My God, it's beautiful though being black.
Did you feel like when you were singing those songs, were you not allowed to stay in the same hotels that you were performing, or?
I've always demanded my way. I had a lot of mouth, and I would talk, and somebody they said, "Oh, go on, Richard," and they put me on in the room, and I didn't tell nobody.
The only time we would get a chance to sleep would be behind a theater screen with a movie going on in between shows.
This is just because you could perform, but you couldn't stay in the same place?
Yeah, we could perform, but we could not stay in those cities.
Dancer Lee Angel met Little Richard as a teenager and has known him ever since.
I was walking down the street in Savannah, Georgia, and someone came over to me and said, "Little Richard wants to meet you." Curiosity got the best of me, so I went up and I met him. That was June 7th, 1956.
And you were just a teenager then? 16. Do you think it was difficult being different in America in the late 50s?
Some people yes, some people no. But you see, Little Richard, that was his gimmick.
I'm just thinking 1955, this is segregation is still going on. You know, whites and blacks aren't even allowed to drink from the same water fountains. And then you've got this guy screaming and hollering and singing basically about sex with a crazy hairstyle and crazy clothes. That can't have been an easy act to do.
It was for Richard.
People knocking but they can't come in. People knocking but they can't come in. People knocking but they can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again.
You know, when I first started, I didn't know what I was doing. And, you know, I'd get on the piano, I'd be going, and it'd be right. I listen back and I said, "Oh boy, didn't nobody show me how to do that?" And be sounding good. So, oh man, listen to that.
It must have been quite shocking for people.
Oh, it was more than shocking. It was elevating. Little Richard is too unsettling a figure, and his showmanship, his show business, was so flamboyant and so camp and involved things that ultimately unsettle the American mindset.
Music historian Barney Hoskins, who's followed Little Richard's career.
The most exciting and sort of threatening rock and roll came from this character who wasn't sort of traditionally black, wasn't traditionally male, wasn't traditionally anything, who really did mix it all up in an irreverent and an utterly flamboyant way, and just said, I'm not abiding by any rules.
He was definitely very outrageous, because he'd been to all these carnivals and circuses in Georgia and around the southern states, and they were all kinds of transvestites and clowns and jugglers and weirdos, they would call them in those days. But he treated all that as normality. That to him was all normal, as well as the family unit his own family unit was normal. His dad, actually, who was quite conservative, working as a caddy in a golf club, he disowned him, and they had a lot of conflicts, He said, I thought I had 10 sons, but I've only got 9, because Richard projected this kind of complex sexuality. And I think that's one of the reasons, because he was outrageous and he did want to be noticed, there's no doubt about that. But he had the talent to go with it.
I had my clothes ripped off in Chicago. I had children chasing me down the streets. I can't begin to tell you, as being his lady, what I went through by fans, because they all wanted a part of me because I was part of him. There was 2 shows and 80,000 kids. And this was Easter 1957. 40,000 kids during the day and 40,000 kids at night. And that's when I lost my clothes.
Little Richard's greatest triumph was to come up with a song which he thought he'd never be asked to record, since it had lyrics that were so risque that even he didn't think he could get away with it. But with the words cleaned up, Tutti Frutti was set to make musical history.
It really was like a big bang of rock and roll. I think Tutti Frutti is the big bang.
That people say that a wap babaloo bap bamboo is the most important sound that's ever been made in
It's the beginning of rock and roll. And it is wap babaloo bop bam boom. Wap babaloo bop. Think about that now. Wap babaloo bop bam boom.
Tutti frutti, oh Rudy. 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 Oh wap babaloo bop bam bam.
Tutti Frutti and songs like that, they kind of broke the racial divide in some ways, didn't they?
Yes, they did. It made white people see that they didn't have everything, and it made black people see that they didn't have nothing, and it was time for them to get something.
His fans actually broke the color barrier, and that's what opened that up. Richard did open that up, so he was the pioneer in it. You know, but a lot of people say one thing about him going into the white audience, but if they hadn't paid for the tickets, how would he be around them? And his music was the magic. His music today is still the magic.
Despite the widespread appeal of his music, it seems that at the time he still wasn't considered in the top league of rock and roll. He may have been followed by thousands of screaming fans, but racism still played its part, as white artists took the spoils and the credit.
Why is he not perceived as the king of rock and roll? Well, because he was black, you know, because he wasn't Elvis. And I think it's as simple as that. That was the story of rock and roll, really, was white artists emulating, impersonating, borrowing, approximating to the thrill and intensity of black rhythm and blues, and making off with the spoils, really. And the most comical sort of example of that obviously being Pat Boone's cover of Tutti Frutti, which is just pathetically kind of mild interpretation of that song.
Pat Boone was very wishy-washy, kind of clinical white singer. He didn't have the sexuality, the verve, the vitality that Richard had. It was, it was just pathetic, really.
It made me want to jump on him and take his white books off his feet. He had on white books. He knows I was a little black boy from Macon, Georgia. And he would take my song, Tutti Frutti, and he would take Fats Domino's song, Blueberry Hill. They was taking everybody's song because it was already a hit. But the white people, the world was so prejudiced to the white kids would have their music, but their parents wouldn't allow them to bring yours, but they let them bring it in there by the white guy. I've been singing all my life and never got what I should have gotten. Never been where I should have went, but I'm still here.
Do you don't think you got the respect you deserve?
I got some, but it could have been a little more.
Did you get paid properly?
Nobody has. None of us have been paid properly. Some people owe us and they never will pay us.
He was exploited terribly by promoters. I mean, one promoter had him touring for about nearly a year and a half. A New York promoter, and he toured all over the States, and he was doing 2 or 3 shows a day, and that would take something. Exasperating, and he wasn't getting a lot of exposure on TV and the media and record contracts at the time, and then the guy refused to pay or didn't pay him. It was just outrageous.
Visiting this country with Gene Vincent is another top rock and roll outfit. A top liner from America, a recording artist who sells them there by the thousand. Here he is to let you people from here, there, and everywhere hear just how his boys sound on this show. You can rock and roll again, this time with Little Richard.
For Little Richard, life was to change dramatically on a tour to Australia in 1957. On the long flight over, he looked out of the window and he believes he was given a sign by God, calling him to renounce rock and roll and turn to religion. To the shock and amazement of his fans, the tour in Australia was cut short and he enrolled in Bible school. Along with the change of heart came a change of musical direction. Gone were the excesses of wild stage performance, replaced instead with gospel.
Does Jesus, does Jesus care? Lord, when I'm
Just at the height of everything, when you were right at the top, you gave up rock and roll.
Yes, I did. Yes. At that time, because I've always been religious. I've always felt that. My idol was always John and Peter. My idol was Moses and those people, you know. I idolize those people. You know, anybody can have connection with God, the omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, the almighty God. You know, I wanted that experience too.
He'd been talking about going to Huntsville College to go into religion. And when he quit and went, that's what he did. Well, first of all, he didn't have a pompadour. He had short hair. Still very handsome. I was just around him for a few hours. And then I vanished again. I'm good at vanishing.
I found out it was just rock and roll, but I had met the Rock of Ages, which meant a lot to me.
Do you miss the rock and roll? Because you gave it up and then you went back to it again, didn't you?
Yeah, I missed it. That's when I came back.
When you meet your fans, do you find that because you sang gospel music, but the voice you used was almost a different kind of voice than the rock and roll kind of music?
Yes, that's right.
Is that because it was coming from a different place?
Yes, it was coming from a different place and from a different mind, from a different sound, and it's just like what's the name of the song? You may not know, but I love you when you try.
I'm going to tell God all about it when I get home.
Despite having left the business, Little Richard was still in huge demand. His record label, Speciality, pumped out all the tracks that he'd recorded before he disappeared, including many that hadn't been considered worthy of release at the time. Promoters wanted him back on tour. In 1962, he accepted an offer to perform in the UK, believing that he was going to be singing gospel. Jimmy Savile, who was presenting television music shows, was drafted in to persuade him to do otherwise.
We all knew him for Bank Crash Wallop and World War III, right? And that's what people paid to go and see and hear, because they'd bought the records. And I was doing a pop show in Birmingham, and the producer said, "Oh, Jim, we got a terrible problem. Richard wants to sing gospel, and they'll go mental. Well, the crowd." So I said, "Yeah, leave it to me." So I go in the dressing room and said, "Richard, Jim, oh." And I said, "Well, the good Lord," because he's a very religious guy, see, "the good Lord may not smile on you today, Richard." "What? Why is that?" I said, "Because you've taken money from people for your records, and they've paid to come and see you here, and you're not going to give them what they've paid for. Now, there's nothing wrong with gospel, everything's all right, but they haven't come for gospel, they've come for the records they've bought." So I left them in a quandary, and I went out and said to the producer, "Maybe, keep your fingers crossed."
We'd heard that he'd gone into a lunatic asylum. Then, of course, there was a thing that he'd gone into a monastery. Then we heard he's only going to sing gospel. That was very disappointing. We went along, and I remember sitting and waiting, and of course he used tension, and you get this Lucille, this fantastic beat building up, and the spotlights on the piano. I was still waiting, and waiting. He used this tension, and then suddenly appeared. Everybody got up and said, "Oh, it's him."
So Richard goes on stage, there's a deafening carry on and all that, and the band were there with all the dots up, all the music up with the gospel, right? And Richard goes on stage, and he turned around and looked at me, I'm standing in the wings, and he went, and the band busked the whole way through.
And then he got to the orchestra pit and he left and he grabbed this microphone and he burst into Long Tall Sally. And the voice, now in those days they didn't have these great big amplifiers that we have now. In those days it pinned you to your seat. You just couldn't believe the power of this. Then he went through a few rock and roll songs and he got up on top of the piano and he was perspiring and all the spotlight was on. It was like diamonds flying off him. And suddenly he fell down as though he'd been shot by a sniper. And there was absolute silence. We all thought, God, he's had a heart attack. He's over. Because the energy was so amazing. We never saw anything like it. The guy's killed himself. Of course, St. John's ambulance brought the stretcher up and they started to bring him down the aisle. And then suddenly the sax player blew a note and he woke up. What, Papa Lou? And he ran back on the stage. And everybody in the audience ran to the stage to touch him. It was just an extraordinary experience.
Yeah, Long Tall Sally, this beach got everything that Uncle John need, oh baby. Yeah, baby.
Little Richard had gone from the peaks of global success to the depths of drug abuse. He tried to reconcile his religious faith with his talent for a music that he sometimes referred to as satanic. So it's not surprising that during the course of walking that line, he'd come off the rails more than once. Lee Angel again.
I lived in London for 3 years. And I found out that Richard was going to be on Tom Jones' show. He did a song called As Time Goes By. I saw the loneliest man, a man on that show that looked like he didn't have a friend. That's when I came back to the States. What I discovered when I got back here was not the Richard that I knew. I guess that's when the test really came in. Because he was doing drugs. He was doing a lot of things. But I'm happy to say that he hasn't done any of that since 1976.
Why do you think he went into that as somebody who was religious?
People around him. Because I know the people I came back into when I came back from London. The people around him.
I'm just like a poor boy who needs a home. Just like a poor dog that needs a bone. You know that I love you. Please have mercy on me. Have mercy on me.
By the mid-80s, you'd sort of moved into another phase where you were so far removed from the dawn of rock and roll that you couldn't really say there was a sort of continuum, and therefore stars like Little Richard had to get their fingers into different sorts of pies, and you had the likes of I'm not talking rock and roll here, but James Brown and the Blues Brothers and so forth. You'd find these figures popping up in kind of movies, or they were being sampled, or something. There had to be a new currency for them, really. I felt, I suppose, a little bit that there was a slight element, as there is with anyone like that who hasn't commercially sustained a career in terms of kind of record sales through the decades. There's a sort of hint of slight desperation there, and how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we stay at all relevant, and rather than just becoming some sort of nostalgia act, occasionally sort of playing Las Vegas for tourists.
Are you surprised that you're still here? Because it's been such a long journey.
Yes. And I'm glad. I'm so glad. And I'm thankful and giving honor to the Most High God for allowing me to be alive at this time of my life. You know, because I'll be 76 this year, and God has let me be in the land with the living. I've been a rock and roll singer, and I made a lot of beautiful music. I made a lot of good gospel music. I love country music, and I've been very blessed.
And it came to pass that in the year of rock and superstar, King Richard returned from exile to claim his throne. And from around the world the cry was...
How different do you think the world would be, and the world of music would be, without Little Richard?
No Jimi Hendrix, no Beatles, no James Brown, no Elvis Presley. Because Richard opened the doors for that music. We introduced the world to rock and roll.
Good golly, Miss Molly, go and tell everybody, every Johnny, Joe, and Jack, that the king is back. We're gonna read it, deed it, gonna let it all burn, gonna have a celebration for the king's return. I'm the king of rock and roll. Oh, the king of rock and roll.
The concert was atmospheric, it's electric, it's contagious, and I mean, I've seen at Richard concerts, I've seen parents who've come with their kids, right? Not 10-year-old kids, 12, 14-year-old kids who were into the rock and roll at the time. And the parents finishing up, dancing and carrying on in the aisles, and the kids pulling them back down. You're not supposed to do that, you're old. Wonderful, wonderful.
Elvis Presley, have you heard the news? I'm gonna walk over your blue suede shoe, 'cause I'm the king of rock and roll. I'm the king.
I used to tell my wife when I first got married, she used to tell me, you think that you're special. I am special. She is too. We all are special. God made us special.
And did he give you that voice?
Oh, yes, he did. Yes, he, without any doubt. Without any doubt, he gave it to me.
I'm the king of rock and roll. Oh, the king of rock and roll. But I'm gonna sing and shout, it ain't no doubt about it. I'm the king of rock and roll. I'm the king of rock and roll. Oh, the king of rock and roll. But I'm gonna sing and shout, it ain't no doubt about it. I'm the king of rock and roll. I'm the king of rock and roll. Oh, the king of rock and roll.
50 Years of Little Richard was presented by Safraz Manzoor and produced by Mark Rickards.